A small land defied a mighty empire. New capitalism battled old feudal ways. Protestantism challenged Catholicism's might. This was the Netherlands' fight for independence from Spain. A war that raged for almost 80 years. It forever reshaped the destinies of the Netherlands, Spain, and all of Europe. Though the Netherlands is small on any map, its strength should never be underestimated. Even back in the Middle Ages, numerous cities rose here. Trade and seafaring truly flourished. By the 15th century, this region became the heart of the Northern Renaissance. It was a land of wealth, dense population, and vibrant culture. Under Habsburg rule, the Netherlands found greater chances for trade with Germany. And after the Habsburgs gained control of Spain, Dutch ports saw Spanish galleons arrive. These ships were laden with gold from the New World. This wealth also contributed significantly to the country's prosperity. At that time, the United Netherlands, as we know it, did not yet exist. The territory was divided into 17 distinct provinces. There were 4 duchies, 7 counties, and many small feudal lordships. These belonged to minor lords, and their numbers and borders constantly shifted. The number 17 only became fixed because, by the first meeting of the local parliament in 1464, that was precisely the number of feudal fiefs within the country. Nearby was the bishopric of Liege, which did not belong to the Habsburgs. It is typically omitted from this history, though geographically it lay close by. In the 16th century, the Netherlands was significantly impacted by Protestantism. The most widespread form was Calvinism, originating from France. It found many followers among the townspeople. Anabaptism also emerged here, primarily taking root among the farming communities. Meanwhile, Lutheranism arrived from Germany and gained popularity in Friesland. The Habsburgs, being devout Catholics, attempted to suppress these new faiths, but without success. Emperor Charles V made certain compromises, yet these only delayed the inevitable conflict. The Habsburgs governed the Netherlands through their appointed governors, known as stadholders. Their authority was checked by the local parliament, the States General. Thus, the country maintained considerable independence in its political affairs. In 1556 in Brussels, Charles V officially abdicated his throne. He then divided his vast possessions between his brother and his son. Spain became the central focus of Philip II's domains. He also inherited territories in Italy, alongside the Netherlands. At that particular time, Spain stood as the most powerful state across all of Europe. Its formidable fleet commanded incredibly profitable colonies in the Americas. The Spanish infantry, known as the tercios, were widely regarded as the continent's strongest military force. The kingdom's immense power relied heavily on gold and silver sourced from Latin America. With such vast quantities available, prices for these metals across Europe naturally dropped. To offset these losses, the Spanish imported even more gold, but prices continued to fall further. The nation became dependent on this single resource, and the situation worsened each passing year. Continuous wars and the ongoing struggle against the Turks added to these mounting problems. Emperor Charles V left his son with enormous, crippling debts. Within the Netherlands alone, these debts amounted to a staggering 3 million livres. Philip II, following his father's established policies, accumulated even more debt. Consequently, throughout the 80 Years' War, Europe's most powerful kingdom actually went bankrupt multiple times. Philip II, a deeply devout Catholic, appointed Margaret of Parma as his regent in the Netherlands in 1559. He also made Cardinal Antoine Perronneau de Granville her chief advisor. Granville effectively held the reins of power in the country. He promptly introduced the Spanish Inquisition and relentlessly persecuted Protestants. His actions were so harsh that in 1564, Philip II, under pressure from the Dutch Parliament, dismissed Granville. However, the persecution of Protestants, unfortunately, did not cease. In 1565, a significant group of Dutch nobles presented a petition to Margaret of Parma. They were demanding an immediate end to the persecution of Protestants. When she inquired about the identity of these individuals, one of her advisors contemptuously replied, "They are merely beggars." In the Dutch language, the word for beggars is gozem. From that moment on, the Protestants proudly adopted the name Goosen beggars. The winter of 1565 to 1566 was exceptionally severe and harsh. Widespread crop failures unfortunately led to widespread famine. Then, during the summer, an uprising erupted, famously known as the iconoclastic fury or Bildenstorm. Protestants began to destroy churches and monasteries. They accused the Catholics of practicing idolatry. In direct response, Philip II dispatched an army of 10,000 men to the Netherlands. This force was led by Fernando Alvarez de Toledo, who was widely known as the Duke of Alba. By the time the Spanish troops had marched north from Italy, the uprising itself had already subsided. Three influential nobles played a crucial role in these events. Prince William of Orange, originally German from the county of Nassau, served as the stadtholder of three provinces. Count Lamerle of Egmont was a hero of the 11th Italian War and a victor at the Battle of Gravelines. Philip de Montmorency, Count of Horn, had previously served as chamberlain to the emperor. Despite all three being Catholics themselves, they actively defended the Protestants. They managed to successfully halt the persecutions. Most of the rebels subsequently dispersed, and any remaining were decisively crushed by local forces. In the summer of 1567, the formidable Duke of Alba finally arrived in the Netherlands. He promptly resumed the persecution, targeting not only Protestants but also moderate Catholics. The Duke established a notorious tribunal known as the Council of Blood. According to various estimations, between 1,000 and 20,000 people were executed based on its verdicts. Additionally, nearly 60,000 people were forced to flee the country. The Duke of Alba then summoned the Dutch nobles for what appeared to be negotiations. However, this was a deliberate trap. Counts Egmont and Horn were immediately arrested. They were executed a year later. William of Orange managed to flee to Germany. There, he began gathering mercenaries in preparation for the upcoming war. The assembled troops were planned to advance in three separate groups. This military campaign became known in history as the First Invasion of Orange. It is widely considered the official beginning of the 80 Years' War. Nevertheless, the offensive faced immediate failure right from the start. The central group was decisively defeated at the border. The northern group, under the command of William's brother Louis and Adolf of Nassau, laid siege to Groningen. Louis managed to ambush and defeat the Spaniards. However, his brother Adolf tragically lost his life in the fighting. By summer, the Duke of Alba had reached the northern provinces. William's forces were compelled to retreat. Louis attempted to set up an ambush for Alba, but Alba, recognized as one of the most talented commanders of his era, saw through the plan. The Duke of Alba aimed to thoroughly suppress the rebellion. He tasked his son, Fadrique Alvarez de Toledo, more commonly known as Don Fadrique, with re-establishing dominance across the territories. The Spanish forces advanced from one settlement to another, brutally pillaging each one. Towns like Mechelen, Zutphen, and Naarden were all subjected to plunder. Haarlem, after enduring a grueling 7-month siege, finally yielded with a promise of mercy. However, Don Fadrique disregarded his commitment. During the summer of 1573, the Spanish army initiated a siege around Alkmaar. Just as the city was about to fall, its defenders employed a remarkably bold strategy. They breached the dike, causing the surrounding plains where the Spanish encampment lay to flood. The Spanish were consequently compelled to withdraw. This marked the initial, yet far from the final, successful utilization of the sea as a weapon in the ongoing conflict. The Duke of Alba also intended to dismantle the rebels' naval force. In Amsterdam, he commenced the construction of vessels for a Spanish fleet. That autumn of 1573, this fleet of 18 ships was deployed to pursue the insurgents. However, within the Zuiderzee Bay, it encountered the rebels. The engagement persisted for 6 days and concluded with a significant Spanish defeat. On land, Alba pressed on with his offensive, laying siege to Leiden, which was well prepared for a defense. Nevertheless, due to deteriorating health, the Duke decided to retire. His successor, Luis de Requesens Zuniga, was more of a statesman than a military leader and did not participate in any combat. The leadership of the Spanish forces was passed among various generals, each pursuing their distinct approach to the war. In the spring of 1574, Louis and Henry of Nassau attempted to relieve the siege of Leiden. Sancho de Vila moved to intercept them and achieved victory over Orange's forces at the Battle of Mocherheide, tragically resulting in the deaths of both of William's brothers. While the Dutch faced challenges on land, they achieved triumphs at sea. In January of that same year, the Sea Beggars vanquished the Spanish fleet in Zeeland, and in May, they set fire to Spanish vessels in the harbor of Lilo. That autumn, as Leiden's defenders faced imminent starvation, William of Orange enacted a brilliant scheme. He flooded the low-lying areas surrounding the city. The Spanish, overwhelmed by the rising waters and assaulted by Dutch amphibious units, were forced to retreat. In 1575, the Spaniards attempted to seize control of Zeeland. They initiated a siege of Zierikzee and maintained control of the city until the summer of 1576. However, Spain's financial reserves were depleted, and the mercenary soldiers had not received payment for 2 full years. Consequently, the troops revolted and plundered Zierikzee. News of this mutiny circulated rapidly. The remainder of the Spanish army also commenced to loot the towns under their authority. The most notorious incident was the infamous sack of Antwerp. For several days, the soldiers ransacked the city, brutally killing almost all of its inhabitants. These harrowing occurrences became known in history as the Spanish Fury. In the summer of 1576, a new Assembly of States General was convened in Brussels, proposing that the provinces unite against the insubordinate Spanish soldiers. All provinces concurred except for Luxembourg. Its garrison had not joined the mutiny, thus the troubles had bypassed them. This accord eventually became historically recognized as the Pacification of Ghent. And 16 provinces then formed the First Union of Brussels. Meanwhile, Philip II appointed his own half-brother, the celebrated hero of the Battle of Lepanto, John of Austria, more commonly referred to as Don Juan, to serve as the new governor. Acknowledging the intricate nature of the situation, he consented to the pacification of Ghent. In 1577, through collaborative efforts, the Netherlands were successfully cleared of the roving bands of former mercenary soldiers. As stipulated by the agreement, Don Juan was to withdraw all Spanish troops from the Netherlands, and he honored his promise, relocating all garrisons to Luxembourg. As soon as the Spanish garrisons departed the country, local Protestant factions seized authority in numerous locations. In 1577, the rebels secured control in Ghent and Antwerp, and a year later in Amsterdam. Simultaneously, William of Orange positioned his troops in the northern territories. Don Juan recognized the potential complete loss of the Netherlands, so during the summer of 1577, he captured Namur and began redeploying his forces back into the region. In response to this action, William of Orange made his way into Brussels. Working alongside representatives from the provinces, he dismissed Don Juan from his governorship and extended an invitation to the young Matthias of Habsburg to assume the position. Matthias held moderate viewpoints and attempted to foster reconciliation between Catholics and Protestants, but his endeavors proved unsuccessful. Philip II issued an order for his brother to resume military action once more. Don Juan achieved victory over the Dutch at Jomblu and subsequently recaptured Brussels. Although he succumbed to the plague shortly thereafter, his successor as governor was Alessandro Farnese, the son of the Duke of Parma. He was determined to completely vanquish the rebellion and began assembling a fresh military force. In 1579, 7 northern provinces entered into the Union of Utrecht, pledging to jointly combat the Spanish. Subsequently, other Dutch provinces under Protestant governance joined them. The most influential among these was Holland, and before long its name became synonymous with the Union of Utrecht, and later with the Netherlands itself, which even today is frequently called simply Holland, named after one of its provinces. Concurrently, the religious division intensified. Protestants were increasingly viewed as proponents of the Union of Utrecht, while Catholics were perceived as loyalists to the king. To prevent a decline in support, William of Orange formally converted to Protestantism. A considerable number of Catholics, however, sided with the Spaniards. The most notable among these was Count George de Lalande, the stadtholder of 4 northern provinces. He pledged loyalty to Spain and successfully captured Groningen. William's military forces were incapable of expelling him from the northern territories. Following this, de Lalande attempted to advance further north, but his progress was halted for 4 months by the siege of Steenwijk. William of Orange urgently required alliances. In 1580, he extended an offer to Francis of Valois, Duke of Anjou, proposing he take on the role of ruler of the Netherlands. The Duke arrived in Antwerp accompanied by a French army, and a year later, the provinces that constituted the Union of Utrecht officially declared their independence from Spanish rule. Nevertheless, the Duke's authority was constrained by the States General, which greatly displeased him. In 1583, Francis attempted a coup d'état, but it ultimately failed, prompting his hasty return to France. The conflict with Spain persisted. In 1582, Alessandro Farnese initiated a new offensive with a reinforced army. The subsequent year, he succeeded in capturing western Flanders. He then commenced a siege of Ghent, which resisted for close to a year before ultimately falling to the Spanish in 1584. Around the same period, following yet another assassination attempt in Delft, William of Orange was killed. The Spanish forces continued to achieve battlefield successes. In 1585, Farnese captured Antwerp after a protracted siege lasting a full year. In search of fresh support, the rebels turned their attention to Queen Elizabeth I of England. She declined to assume the role of ruler of the Netherlands, but did dispatch an army under the command of Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester. He was officially proclaimed governor of the Netherlands in 1586. However, the Earl proved to be an ineffective military commander. The rebels suffered defeat at the Battle of Zutphen and lost control of the crucial cities of Hava and Sluis. Ultimately, due to a disagreement with the States General concerning financial matters, Dudley was recalled in 1588. Philip II had long been seeking a justification to initiate hostilities with England. The Spaniards assembled a formidable fleet, known as the Invincible Armada, with the objective of conquering the island nation. The strategic plan involved Alessandro Farnese's army from the Netherlands joining forces with the fleet. However, when the Spanish vessels arrived in Calais, it became evident that Farnese was unable to provide troops. He possessed barely enough soldiers to sustain their ongoing engagement with the rebels. Meanwhile, the Dutch Navy, in conjunction with the English fleet, launched an assault on the Spanish ships within the English Channel. The persistent threat of a Dutch attack compelled the Armada to make a swift withdrawal from Calais. It did not dare to enter any Dutch ports. In the final analysis, the Spaniards retreated, and the Dutch rebels played a crucial role in aiding England to defeat the invincible Armada. However, upon the Spanish vessels reaching Calais, it was discovered that Farnese was unable to provide for his troops. He possessed just barely sufficient troops to persist in their struggle against the insurgents. Concurrently, the fleet from the Netherlands, allied with those from England, launched an assault on the Spanish ships within the English Channel. The persistent danger of a Dutch assault compelled the fleet to make a hasty withdrawal from Calais. It hesitated to venture into any Dutch harbors. Ultimately, the Spanish forces withdrew, and the Dutch insurgents played a crucial role in aiding England to vanquish the formidable Armada. Maurice of Orange, son of William, became the new stadtholder for the Netherlands. He proved himself a capable leader despite his young age. Maurice got rid of unreliable hired soldiers and started building a standing army of volunteers. To boost their fighting ability, he implemented regular field exercises and tactical training. Maurice favored swift, targeted assaults over massive battles, using strategic movements. He took Auxil in 1586. His reputation truly grew in 1590 when he seized Breda by deception. A merchant vessel entered the city, with soldiers secretly stowed away inside. During the night, they neutralized the guards and opened the city gates for the Dutch forces. Meanwhile, renewed conflict erupted in France with the Huguenot Wars. This time, Spanish soldiers supported the Guises, causing the fighting in the Netherlands to temporarily lessen. Around this period, Alessandro Farnese was assassinated in France, and his governorship passed through a series of less competent individuals. Maurice of Orange initiated an offensive in 1591. He first reclaimed Zutphen and nearby settlements, isolating a Spanish contingent in the north. By 1594, he had completely routed them, returning Groningen and its surroundings to Dutch authority. Late in 1596, Spanish forces established a large winter encampment near Turnhout. Maurice of Orange launched a surprise assault. Caught off guard, the Spanish were unable to establish defensive formations and fled in disarray. The Dutch pursued and eradicated them. This victory at Turnhout paved Maurice's route to the German frontier, confining the Spanish threat to the southern regions. His military actions concluded with the capture of Lingen, a small German territory formerly claimed by the House of Orange. Shortly before his passing in 1598, Spain's King Philip II transferred stewardship of the Netherlands to his nephew, Archduke Albert of Austria. This was part of the dowry for his daughter Isabella, whom Albert wed. In 1600, the Dutch States General resolved to take Dunkirk, a prosperous port in the southern Netherlands. Maurice of Orange disagreed with this objective, deeming the operation overly challenging and expensive. Despite his reservations, he ultimately led 16,000 soldiers towards Dunkirk. Close to Newport, Maurice's troops encountered the Spanish army commanded by Albert of Austria. A brutal engagement with significant casualties on both sides resulted in a Dutch victory. This marked their first major triumph on the open battlefield. Albert withdrew with the remaining elements of his forces, while Maurice, depleted by losses, was compelled to abandon the offensive and return to the Netherlands. After reorganizing, Albert decided to conquer Ostend, the final Flemish city that still backed the rebels. The siege commenced in 1601 and endured for 3 years. The Dutch made multiple attempts to break the siege, but all proved unsuccessful. Maurice attempted to divert the Spanish by attacking the eastern provinces, but this effort failed. Albert continued the siege, supported by Ambrosio Spinola, a Genoese merchant who gained renown as an exceptional military leader. In the spring of 1604, Maurice besieged the Flemish city of Sluis to divert the Spanish and aid Ostend's defenders. Spinola was unable to prevent this and returned to resume the siege of Ostend. By late summer, the Dutch had captured Sluis, but it was too late. The Ostend garrison, weakened from years of conflict, yielded to the Spanish in September 1604. In 1605, Spinola initiated a military campaign across the eastern Netherlands. This time, the Spanish forces were well provisioned. Rather than engaging in prolonged sieges, he executed rapid assaults, advancing as far as Lingen. Later, near Mulheim, he confronted Maurice's army in combat. Employing a skillful maneuver, Spinola compelled Maurice to withdraw. Although the Dutch army survived, this was the first Spanish victory against Maurice. Spinola's campaign concluded in 1606 when Spain faced bankruptcy again, forcing his withdrawal southward. Concurrently, at sea, the Dutch navy continued to inflict severe damage on Spain. They vanquished enemy fleets near their own coastlines and carried out raids on Spanish maritime trade. The Dutch government frequently granted letters of marque to privateers, authorizing their attacks in exchange for a share of the captured goods. In return, a portion of the spoils would be given to the state. The most significant naval engagement was the Battle of Gibraltar. A Dutch fleet of 30 vessels sailed to the Iberian Peninsula and engaged the Spanish fleet in the Strait of Gibraltar. The battle spanned 4 days. All Spanish vessels were sunk, and the Dutch returned home laden with riches. Exhausted from decades of warfare, Spain agreed to the 12 years truce with the Netherlands in Antwerp in 1609. This accord might have brought lasting peace, but in 1618, the 30 Years' War erupted across Europe. The Spanish Habsburgs allied with their Austrian relatives, and the religious dimensions of the conflict soon drew the Netherlands back into the fighting. In 1620, Ambrosio Spinola conquered the Lower Palatinate on behalf of the Habsburgs. Upon the expiration of the truce, he launched a new offensive, capturing the German city of Jülich, which Dutch troops had occupied since the War of the Jülich Succession. This action aimed to obstruct German Protestant backing for the Netherlands. As Jülich came under siege, Maurice attempted to relieve the city. However, he narrowly escaped an ambush set by Spinola and was forced to retreat. During the winter of 1622, the garrison of Jülich surrendered to the Spanish forces. Spinola's subsequent objective was Breda, which he put under siege in 1624. By this time, Maurice of Orange's health had significantly declined, compelling him to relinquish command. He died in 1625, and 2 months later, Breda surrendered. It appeared Spain had regained the advantage, and a Dutch defeat seemed unavoidable. Nevertheless, the 30 Years' War severely depleted Spain's financial resources. Numerous Spanish regiments were reassigned to Germany, leaving Spinola without adequate forces to continue his campaign. Spanish internal politics exacerbated the situation. In 1627, the king's close confidant, Count Duke of Oliveras, had Spinola removed from his command after the loss of the minor border town of Grunewald. The new commander of the Spanish contingent in the Netherlands was William of Orange's nephew, Henrik van den Berg. He had previously switched his allegiance to Spain. Van den Berg proved to be an ineffective military leader and suffered numerous defeats at the hands of the Dutch forces. At sea, the Dutch navy continued to inflict crippling blows upon the Spanish. The most notable event was the privateering expedition led by Peter Zoon Hein. He repeatedly raided Spanish vessels in the Caribbean, but his greatest renown stemmed from the naval engagement in the Bay of Matanzas, near Cuba. There, the Dutch captured Spanish galleons carrying gold and silver intended for Europe. The total value of the captured treasure reached 7 million guilders, equivalent to the Netherlands' yearly budget. In 1629, Dutch forces besieged 's-Hertogenbosch, a formidable fortress located centrally in the country that Maurice of Orange had previously been unable to conquer. The siege persisted for 6 months. Hendrik van den Berg attempted to relieve the city but was defeated. To support the Spanish, Italian mercenaries under Ernesto Montecuccoli marched deep into Dutch territory, reaching as far as Amersfoort. However, when stadholder Frederick Henry of Orange captured Wesel, Montecuccoli's army was cut off from its supply lines. Recognizing the inevitability of defeat, he plundered the surrounding areas and, after sustaining heavy losses, retreated into Germany. The conflict continued, and both sides were weary. In 1630, they planned extensive military operations. The Dutch intended an offensive into Flanders, while the Spanish planned an invasion of Brabant. Despite these plans, they only possessed sufficient strength to capture a few border fortifications. The most significant achievement was Orange's campaign along the River Meuse. Capitalizing on the defection of the Spanish governor Hendrik van den Berg to the Dutch side, he captured multiple towns and advanced as far as Maastricht. In 1635, France entered the war against Spain, an event within the broader 30 Years' War. The Spanish forces stationed in the Netherlands were compelled to shift their focus southward. The Dutch attempted to exploit this opportunity and attack from the rear, but they were too exhausted. The 1635 siege of Leuven resulted in a withdrawal, and attempts to capture Dunkirk also failed. Their sole notable success was the recapture of Breda in 1637. Back in 1638, the Dutch attempted to seize Antwerp, but near Calais, Spanish troops under Prince Ferdinand launched a surprise attack and routed them. However, at sea, the Dutch continued to maintain the upper hand. Spain then made the decision in 1639 to send additional forces via the ocean. Intercepting this fleet in the English Channel was the Dutch Navy, which, after fighting for several days, completely destroyed nearly 70 Spanish ships. This significant defeat has since been remembered historically as the Battle of the Downs. The Dutch fleet that was vanquished was referred to by them as the Second Armada, serving as a grim reminder of the fate befalling the Invincible Armada. Soon after, Portugal experienced a rebellion, further worsening Spain's difficulties. With France viewed as their primary adversary, Spain concentrated its military efforts against them. Nevertheless, in 1643, they suffered a defeat at Roquefort. Their dominance in the Netherlands was consequently weakened significantly. Yet, the Dutch were too worn out to capitalize on this advantageous situation. In 1645, they launched an invasion into Flanders, but only succeeded in capturing the city of Hulst. Peace discussions had already commenced as early as 1644 in Munster, initially between France and Spain, but shortly thereafter, Spain acknowledged the Dutch representatives and initiated negotiations with them too. These talks continued for several years, ultimately concluding in 1648 with the signing of the Treaty of Munster. This treaty brought an end to both the 30 Years' War across Europe and the 80 Years' War for Dutch independence simultaneously. Spain officially acknowledged the Netherlands as a sovereign nation, but strictly within the territories they actively controlled. The southern regions remained under Spanish jurisdiction, eventually becoming known as the Spanish Netherlands. This led to a large-scale population shift. Catholics relocated to the south, while Protestants moved northward. This action conclusively solidified the division of the Netherlands into two distinct entities. On the European map, a new nation was officially established: the Republic of the Seven United Provinces of the Netherlands. This emerging country clearly illustrated how Europe had transformed, with its politics increasingly steered by business people rather than solely by the nobility. Since the era of the Italian city-states, the Netherlands marked the first European nation to adopt this structure.